Welcome, everyone, to Eternal Life Plan. You know me. I'm Christine Harrington. I'm glad to have you here with me tonight. We are going to talk to Stephen O'Reilly. Now, this is the great thing about social media. I was on X, just posting away on X, and Stephen saw one of my posts referring to the post that Elizabeth Yore pointed back to Vigano, that we demand answers. Catholics demand answers about the conclave. Pope Francis isn't even dead, but we're already talking about the conclave. Stephen O'Reilly had commented on one of my many rants on X regarding this. And I asked him to come on the show because he wrote an incredible article about Pope Benedict. You know, the whole conspiracy theory now, I think we've got 3, and Stephen's going to go through them with us, about Pope Benedict's resignation. So he wrote a fascinating article. I have put the link in the show notes on the YouTube channel, so you can see that there. We're going to show you this on air, and I'd like for you to meet Stephen R. O'Reilly. Actually, hey, did I add an initial to your name that wasn't supposed to be there?
You are. It's Stephen Matthew O'Reilly, but I
okay.
Steve is fine.
Thanks, Steve, for coming on Eternal Life Plan. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate you linking your article to my X file.
Oh yeah, well the rant actually, I had not seen your X rant. What I saw was I just going through YouTube. It popped into my YouTube feed, and I think the title of it was something like "I've had enough," or "I can't take anymore." So that's a title that's something you gotta watch. So I watched that, and you had talked about, I think, some of the stuff going on with LifeSite, and there was Liz's tweet that you copied in your video, where she said that no conclave until there's an investigation or something along that line, and that's what kind of the whole discussion about what LifeSite's kind of saying right now kind of led me to send it to you, because I thought you might find it interesting.
It sure was. And everyone, before we dive into Stephen's article, we had a little technical issue in studio a little while ago where Stephen all of a sudden couldn't hear me. The audio was gone. So if this happens again while we're live, Stephen will try to reboot and come back. If he still can't hear me, then we'll just continue on. Just to give you a heads up, we had a little technical difficulty, and I'm not sure why. So, Stephen, before we get into your article, I would like to show everyone.
That's my. I'm working on a historical fiction trilogy, and can you hear me?
I can hear you. I pulled you out and shouldn't have.
Okay. Oh, no problem. Yeah, the book is Pia Fidelis, The Two Kingdoms. It's book 1 of my trilogy, so I'm hard at work on part 2, and it's a book about one of the main characters is Julian the Apostate. So there's an interesting character in the book.
And where can they get the book, Steve?
Oh, like Amazon, any probably online publisher or bookstore, they can find it.
So it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Okay. All right.
You can't get away from it. Yep.
All right. Now I'm going to share my screen, everyone, so you can see the article that Stephen wrote. And Stephen, this is on your blog, correct?
Yes, it is.
And what is the name of your blog?
The name of the blog is Roma Locuta Est. Rome has spoken. Apologetics blog on just Catholic and kind of general Christian apologetics, though it has focused in recent times on the kind of what I call the Benny Papist controversy. Some folks call them Benny Vacantist or other things. But I had chosen one of the books you did not show is the book I wrote against those who claim Benedict was still Pope till the end of his life. I have a book out there called Valid, The Resignation of Benedict XVI, where I go through in a objection reply format, kind of answering all the objections that people have, saying, no, he was still Pope for this reason. And then I reply, and that book is called Valid. That's also available out there online, Amazon, and other places.
Okay. So this article, Pope Benedict resigned freely. What caused you to write this article, Steve?
Yeah, well, going back a couple of months, LifeSite has been very good. They've had kind of this ongoing debate of different voices coming on, kind of pro and against whether or not Benedict was remained Pope or not. Was the resignation valid or not? And I think originally I replied to a article by Dr. Mazza. Then he and I had gone back and forth in a couple articles. There was one by Patrick Coffin that I replied to. And then, so it's kind of this back and forth. Another one too, I think Dr. Mazza replied to Bishop Schneider, and I didn't think Bishop Schneider would probably bother responding to him, actually. So I thought I would come in and kind of reply to some of the points that Dr. Mazza had made. So that's out there on LifeSite. So I appreciate LifeSite, allowing my voice out there. But I had noticed, though, and I've noticed for some time, that LifeSite kind of, I don't know if it's their official position, but certainly some of the higher ups, and you'll see on their podcast, seem to be leaning heavily towards the Benedict remained Pope to the end type of thing, or maybe Francis is not Pope type end of the spectrum. And I'd noticed that. And then in recent weeks, there have been a couple things. They had trumpeted this new letter from Vigano, and they call it a bombshell, where Vigano had come out saying, again, calling for an investigation, basically that Benedict was forced out. And they had some podcasts and all that. And I thought I would write a response to some of the things that I'd seen coming out on LifeSite. And I had submitted an article. And again, I have no right to expect them to publish an article by me. And I appreciate the fact that they had published so many over the last couple of months. So my appreciation of LifeSite News, but this one they did not publish. And so I thought folks should hear another voice on that. So again, I appreciate you kind of, putting this out there, and it's on my blog with the full article that would have appeared with some minor alterations. I did make some minor alterations, but in substance, it's the same article that I had submitted to them.
Okay. Now, there have been, as you write in your article, Vigano came out with a third conspiracy theory of why Pope Benedict resigned. Would you go through what each one of those conspiracy theories are?
Yeah, he's had a few. They keep trying, kind of hard to keep track of them. But first of all,
Steve, let me stop you right there. That's the troubling thing about Vigano. In my opinion, the first conspiracy theory didn't work, so now we've come up with another one. You set me straight.
Well, yeah, that's part of the problem. You'll see amongst. I mean, I don't mind people shifting theories. I mean, I've shifted theories. How I kind of view things, but you should follow where the evidence goes, takes you. I thought I'd be going this way. Oh, but this new bit takes me that way. But it seems like folks are like, I want to go over there, and darn it, I'm going to find a road that gets me there. And it might not be a road, but I'm going to find one. I'm going to cut myself with a machete through the jungle so I get there and create a road. So it seems like they are trying to fit evidence for their theory. So it's kind of tangentious what they're doing. I think that they're not really following this, in my opinion, following the evidence where it would take them, which would be away from that. Now, going back to LifeSite calling for a investigation, well, I actually agree with that. And actually, I had published an article back in November calling for Trump to kind of investigate whether or not there had been any kind of U.S. intelligence or other type of involvement in either Benedict's resignation or in the conclave. But my view was, let's have transparency, right? You're releasing the JFK files, RFK, MLK. what's going on with COVID, and hopefully the Epstein files, and hopefully we get those out. There's a question about that now, but so I think transparency is great. Let's let it all out there. However, the spin I had on it though was I didn't think anything would change anything. That even if you found that there was, for example, that there was something nefarious about the conclave. We are 12 years on. There's a doctrine called the doctrine of universal and peaceful acceptance. The church has accepted Francis as Pope for 12 years now, and you can't undo that. I mean, that's the church has accepted that, and then the church has taught, or as a dogmatic fact, that if you that is an infallible sign that if the majority, the unanimous or the near unanimous or the unanimous consensus of the bishops and the faithful accept a man as Pope, he's Pope. It's an infallible sign that he is Pope. It doesn't make him Pope, but it's an infallible sign that he is Pope. And we're 12 years on. I think there's some odd things that went on in the conclave. I've written articles. I wrote a series of articles on my blog as a compendium called the Conclave Chronicles, where I kind of look at things like, if you remember the influential Italian gentleman that McCarrick talked about. I kind of looked into that. I think I know who the guy is, and kind of what got involved in that, and some other kind of weird stuff that went on with the conclave or around it. So I think there's stuff there. I think it should be investigated, and I think if there are U.S. intelligence files on it somewhere, let's see them. Let's let the truth out. McCarrick was an odd person. He would go around the Curia dropping off envelopes of cash to Curial employees. He traveled around the world on various missions for the U.S. government. He was close to the Obama-Biden administration. So he's a strange, interesting character from an intelligence standpoint. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he was working for the Chinese, the Russians, or us, or being the U.S. government, or all three as some sort of double agent. But let's look at the files. But all that said, we're 12 years in, and the doctrine of universal and peaceful acceptance says that that the universal acceptance of the bishops and the laity is an infallible sign that the man elected as a pope, irrespective of any kind of flaws with the conclave itself. So even it heals in the root any flaws or fraud that might have happened in there. So I don't think you can get around it. And if there is a way around it, oh, great if you can. But even that would take a future pope to say that. And so I think a lot of this worrying about it right now is not helpful, because it's starting to lead people to think about schism. How do I step off this thing? Try to find reasons not to accept the next conclave. That was kind of going back now to the topic of some of the LifeSite news stuff. And I think what you saw with Elizabeth, your tweet, no conclave until there's an investigation. Well, that's going to be your attitude. And then Bishop Strickland just came out with an article. I think it's good. Yeah, we don't want the Cardinals to elect a heretic, but the kind of insinuated seemed to me that maybe we wouldn't accept a bishop that's elected by the College of Cardinals, a unanimous election. That to me is a dangerous position to be in, and we shouldn't be out there telling Catholics that, it seems to me.
Yeah, I was appalled that Liz Yor tweeted that. So let's go back to, before I interrupted your original thought, go through for the audience the 3 conspiracy theories of Pope Benedict being forced to resign.
Well, just not even just talking about Vigano, but there's out there. There's what they call maybe the substantial error theory. This is the one that was kind of like popularized by Anne Barnhart, which is that Benedict erroneously tried to bifurcate the papacy into kind of an active pope and a contemplative pope, and you can't do that. And you can't do that, but that's not what he did, and that's a misconception. But that's her claim, that he did that, and that's an error, that he tried to do it. Therefore, under Canon 188, it talks about substantial error, that would invalidate his resignation. So that's kind of like her theory. Then there's the Andrea Cianci theory, which is, you might have heard the book Ratzinger Code. I've heard the term the Ratzinger Code, where they believe that Benedict, seeing all the modernists in the church surrounding him like sharks, came up with this 4D chess type of move where he was going to create a self-impeded sea. That he was essentially, they don't put it this way, but essentially he's going to pretend to resign. He wrote his resignation in a way that really wasn't a resignation. And it gets to this difference between the Moonists and the Ministerium. And for my article, we don't have to get into all that detail, but that's kind of like their theory. And that Chauncey would say that Ratzinger communicated this to us, that this was kind of going on through things he said. There was like a code so they really kind of read something he says. If he says, "I'm not Pope," well, if you really look at it, it really means he is Pope. Like, for example, there is a quote where he actually says, "I am no longer the supreme pontiff of the Catholic Church." And Chauncey devotes an entire chapter in his book to say why that really means he is Pope. It's really kind of funny. And I devote space in my book and articles showing why Chauncey's wrong. Just looking at the Italian, why Chauncey's wrong, and he admitted what I found was correct, but he said, "Well, that just proves this other thing that was." So nothing. The point is, nothing you say that they will not allow their theories to be falsified, and so that should be a warning sign for anyone with any theory. If it can't be falsified, then they're just. Well, you wouldn't allow anything to falsify it. And then the other theory is that Benedict resigned by force. So that's what was resigned under pressure, and that's kind of
that's the newest one.
Well, no, it's been around, but that's the force now. That's kind of revived now with the LifeSite thing and the Vigano thing coming out, and that brings us to Vigano. Now, first of all, I should say Vigano. I have great respect for Vigano, so I don't mean this to be trashing on Vigano. I mean, Vigano had a long career of honorable service to the church, the Curia, to the popes. He was an honest man, and working in a dishonest world in the Curia, trying to set things straight. So my hat's off to Vigano, and also his work with the testimony coming out publicly and all that, and calling attention to some of the kind of the homosexual, pedophile type of stuff going on. So I do think he's a great man. However, great men can go too far at times, and I think that's the stage where we're at. And that brings us to, for years where he was kind of attacking Francis. Now, Francis has his problems. We're talking about that off air. I mean, I've written articles where I will dispute what kind of like the Francis apologists say. So I have problems with Pope Francis, but I do think he's the Pope. And I have my thoughts of how it's going to get solved in the end, in the future. But I think what Vigano has done is kind of follow what other people are saying, frankly, is that, but the first few years after he came out with his testimony, which is 2018, 2019, he was kind of ambiguous about what he thought. I mean, obviously he didn't like Francis, but what is Francis? He never was clear about that. And then I'm trying to think what year was it 2023? He was invited he was initially invited to the Remnant Forum. I think they had some sort of conference or something. Michael Matt had invited him, but I think when, as I understand it, what was publicly said, when Vigano submitted his video, what he was going to say, we need to look at Francis and why he might not be Pope. And I think Michael Matt quite rightly said, "No, we're not going there." That's my understanding of what happened. I'm just what was publicly said.
I heard the same thing, Steve.
Yeah. So, but what he came out though, he had his theory that I think at that point is that Francis's acceptance of his election was flawed. It was defective. When a man is elected Pope, the cardinals will come to him and say, "Do you accept your election as supreme pontiff?" And he says, "I accept." But his theory was, no, he said, "I accept," but his acceptance was flawed for various reasons, that he had some other ulterior motives of what he was going to do with the church and the papacy, and that would nullify his election. So that was kind of like his theory. And he repeated that theory. I think Dr. Mazza had like an online conference of other kind of substantial error type Benny Papists, and they invited Archbishop Vigano, former Archbishop Vigano, to come and speak online. And I think he repeated that same thing then. Fast forward, if you remember, was it last August? Vigano was basically, I guess, technically was he excommunicated for schism because he had denied Francis was Pope. And I think in his response, he said he again repeated that was because of defective acceptance of the election. But then a month later, in August, responding to a series of written questions from Taylor Marshall asked a question about Muniz and the ministerium, and then Vigano kind of came back. Yeah, that's I don't what he explicit. I don't remember his exact words, other than to say I have it in the article. But he talked about that there was a procedural defect, I think, because of the Muniz and ministerium in his resignation, and also because he created this title of Pope, or position of Pope Emeritus. And that's why his resignation was invalid. So within a course of a month, from telling Rome it's because of an defective acceptance, then a month later he's telling Taylor Marshall it's because of the creation of this canonical monster of the Pope Emeritus. That's why it was invalid. And then fast forward, they made some other minor changes to it. He backed away in his response to Taylor Marshall. He had talked about the Muniz and the ministerium, but I don't know, a couple months ago he had said, I have an article on this too. He backed away from even linking the problems of the resignation to the ministerium, because he came out and he said that Monsignor Bux, who is a very well-respected theologian, he referred to some talk that Monsignor Bux had given somewhere, where he said that, no, Benedict said that when he resigned, when he used the word ministerium in his resignation, he intended to fully resign the papacy. And then so that forced, I think, Vigano to kind of alter his theory, to kind of leave it out and kind of hitch it mostly to the title of Pope Emeritus. And then that leads us now again to this article, or the last couple of weeks he came out, and then he was pushing more he resigned because of under force, or because he was pressured out. And so the comment I make in my article is that he's a respectable guy. I mean, I think Vigano is great, and he has probably he could give a lot of great input to a lot of comments, a lot of topics. But Benny Papism, and whether or not Benedict resigned validly or not, that's not one of the topics he should be looked to as a source, a credible source, because he's been all over the board on it. And if he had inside information as to what happened, that he was pressured, he should have told us that back in 2018. And it's clear the fact, this kind of meandering course of his theories, I think, just demonstrates he doesn't have any inside information, because he hasn't provided it. And it just shows he's just kind of grasping at straws. Like, he has an endpoint he wants to get at. Francis is not Pope. And he's just kind of diverting, well, that doesn't work, and I'll go over here, try this. And that's how a lot of these theories are, that as you look at some of the Benny Papist theorists out there, altered their theories along the way. So one of the points I make in the article is Vigano is just not credible on this issue at all. And so, what he said is not a bombshell. I think John Henry Weston, in one of his articles on the podcasts, they keep on talking, this is a big bombshell. It's not a bombshell.
Well, Steve,
that was overhyped.
That's clickbait. I mean, that's typical. You try to hook the reader to come in and read the article, so they call everything a bombshell, and it's really not.
Well, I mean, out of charity, I don't want to say that, but it's not like, certainly Fox News, everything is, alert, the little siren goes off with that. That's clickbait. But and my thing, though, is I think they maybe, I'm sure they sincerely believe that. But if you look at the history of what Vigano's been saying, it's not a bombshell. It's kind of like, just another theory. He's kind of altered course again. So there's nothing new there. So that's one of the 3 points I made in the article.
So your contention is, after reviewing all of this information, that Vigano didn't have enough evidence to clearly show that Benedict's resignation was forced because, if I remember right, and Steve, you can correct me here, they were pointing back to the Obama administration.
Yeah, well, they point because there are rumors, like if you go back to the book, The Dictator Pope, which is a great book by Henry Serra, that his book of Con Francis, how at one point, I think it was after Francis was elected, that they were concerned that the CIA was listening in that. But there have been articles going back to back to 2012, 2013, after the conclave, that articles alleging that the NSA had been listening in and stuff like that. So there had been some seeming smoke out there, and that had led to the Remnant newspaper having like an open letter to the new Trump administration, calling out some kind of odd things. So you probably heard of the Catholic Spring thing, that John Podesta's group, that they thought there should be, try to get a Catholic Spring, and that's kind of strange. But even though I think what they were envisioning in that set of emails was more of a bottoms up, where if they had overthrown Benedict, that'd be a top step, or inserted Francis into the papacy, that'd be more of a top down thing. But it's the same idea as, how do we change the Catholic Church? So I'd say, that's why I say, let's it does. Look, they tried to overthrow Trump. I mean, so it would not surprise me, that if they had wanted to, if they had tried to, and I said in the article, I said it would not surprise me if they wanted to, tried to, made efforts to try to do something. But even taking all that into account, is two things can be true at the same time. Mm-hmm. Is that the bad guys could have wished bad things to happen. Bad guys might have tried to put things in motion to make things happen to affect Benedict's resignation. But if you looked at what Benedict has said about his resignation, and about the kind of the history of how he's kind of hinted at the fact that he almost kind of he's going to thinking about resigning almost from the very beginning, mm-hmm. at some point along the way, it shows that it was a free his resignation was free, even if there was this. So one of the points I make in the article is that even if you grant Obama, Biden, whoever, that there had been this plot to get Benedict out, or the St. Gallen Mafia, even if you grant all that, Benedict's resignation is still free, because if you look at his motivations as to why he resigns, that was like the third point. So I talked about in the article.
So you're saying it's all a nothing burger?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I'm for. I like being a former. I think I mentioned in our pre-discussion, whatever, that my background, I had worked for the CIA, so I'm interested. So some of these things I say, that's odd. Let's if we can get the government to open up and share, JFK files, whatever, or the Benedict files, or the Francis files, or the McCarrick files, by all means, let's see them. But how I would view that is like I talked about universal acceptance, that even if you find that there was some hanky-panky going on, I don't think it's going to overturn anything. However, the benefit I see from airing it all is that, one, if there's any kind of criminality on the kind of U.S. government side that was done, or just, we don't want the U.S. government mucking around with the Catholic Church, so you have to put something legally in place to kind of make sure it doesn't happen again. Or on the other side of that, say on the Vatican side, is okay, if there's been these outside influences, are the conclave rules strong enough to kind of account for all this, so that in the future you can do something? I don't know what that might be, but that to me would be kind of the benefit of kind of airing all the dirty laundry that might be out there. So I don't say that it's not out there. Like I said, I found some odd things with the conclave itself, or the events around the conclave, but I don't think it's going to in the end change anything because of universal acceptance.
Yeah. And how does that help Catholics? How does all this help Catholics?
Well, I think one is the problem you find is, as I've looked at Benny Papism and looked at the Benny Papists, is that There's one group like I think they tend towards on the Chauncey side, the Ratzinger Code. They have like a petition where they talk about they're not going to accept. They kind of created rules that have to be around any conclave before they will accept it. They won't accept any Francis cardinals, any conclave that had Francis cardinals, and they're going to reject. So already out of the gate, they're setting themselves up to be sedevacantists and schismatics. And then others who kind of say, well, no, we could possibly accept them because there have been times in the past we've had an anti-pope and then a pope, and when the church came together, they kind of recognized the anti-pope's cardinals and all that. Yeah, they say that, but what happens if the next pope says, oh, Benedict's resignation was valid? Now, are they going to then make that the test of whether or not this new pope is a true pope? Will he admit Benedict was forced out or had substantial error, or, kind of pretended to resign? I'm not, it's not clear what they're going to do if that happens. But then again, now you have this new push, the one we're talking about with LifeSite News. Again, not saying LifeSite News is pushing, but kind of hinting in some of the things they've said that you've talked about as well, is, no conclave without an investigation, or Bishop Strickland, as much as I respect him, his recent thing, makes me fear that, if they don't get the Pope that maybe we all want to have, that they will declare him an anti-pope and then put themselves. So what I would say is, for Catholics, is we've had a lot of bad times before in the past. We've had popes like Pope Honorius, Pope, he was ultimately basically found guilty of favoring heresy, even though I think some writers might say he was a monothelite himself. I don't think so. I think it was more he favored heresy, but it took 40 years. He died in 640. It wasn't until the council, I think the Sixth Ecumenical Council in 680, 682, in that time frame, that he was basically condemned by the council and then later by Pope St. Leo II. So it could take 40 years for this thing to work its way out. So the point is, Catholics need to think longer stretch of history. Don't be so concerned about the next article, and then expect that there's going to be some magic bullet that undoes everything. History hasn't worked that way. The Catholic Church is a little bit messier than that. So what we need to do is just do what we can do, recognize what we can't do, right? Christine and Steve are not going to appoint the next pope. We can't undo the last conclave. And most likely no cardinals, no pope are going to undo it. But what we can do is, pray, be good Catholics, know our faith, pray the rosary and educate our kids, maybe have a glass of wine on occasion to calm our nerves at what we see. But, just kind of chillax, and it might be good to step away from some of this as well. I follow all the news and all that, but I think some of the problem on what I see with the Benny Papist is they have like this information bubble where they're just kind of feeding off themselves and kind of start lathering at the mouth, just thinking about this stuff about bombshells and things, when, if they kind of maybe open themselves up to the thoughts of what are the counter arguments, for example, the ATM story that I put in my article. And for years, one of the kind of theories about why Benedict was pressured out was that on January 1st of 2013, the Bank of Italy shut off the ATMs,
Mm-hmm.
payment services, and then they weren't turned on again until February 12th, 2012, which was the day after Benedict announced his resignation. So the theorists say, aha, you have this, like, there was this kind of warning shot to Benedict, get out now. And then, okay, then he said, I'm getting out. Okay, then we'll turn the lights back on for you guys and all that. But if you look at the history of it, it wasn't quite like, that part happened. The timing is correct, but kind of what all was going on in the background tells a different story. The Vatican, as we all know, the Vatican Bank has had a long history of problems with criminality and people hanging themselves from bridges, money laundering.
Cardinal Pell.
Well, he was a good guy. He was trying.
I know he was.
and then they kind of scooted him out, and then there's some serious questions whether or not he was set up.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind he was an honest guy.
Yes,
All the
he
charges are
was.
false. But the question
He
is,
just
was
happened
it?
to be, he accepted the position, not really realizing what was going to, how it was going to
Yeah, yeah.
harm
So
him.
you had all that going on. So, but anyway, but Benedict, the honest guy, he was trying to fix things. So he had approached the Council of Europe or the Vatican underneath them to try to how do we clean this up? Because they were already being looked at because of the money laundering accusations and stuff like that. How do we clean this up? And so that started a process in 2010, and the Council of Europe they had a committee. It was called Moneyval, looking into it. And they were going to come back to the Vatican with a series of recommendations or findings. And I think they had like 16 findings. The Vatican passed 9 of the 16, but they failed or didn't pass the other 7 of the 16 things. So that was like in July of 2012. Come around to December, the Bank of Italy told the Deutsche Bank, which was actually running the ATMs and payment systems for the Vatican, to shut them out. You have to get out. You can't do it. But you can understand why, though. When you have institutions, when you're dealing with other financial institutions, you can't be dealing with people who might themselves be liable to criminality because you open up your own institution to fines for money laundering and things like that. So it's not like, oh, let's be jerks and just shut it off. It's like, no, these guys are a lot of odd stuff going here. We can't be doing business with them. So you can understand from a business standpoint why that might be. So in December, the Vatican already knew that they were going to be shut off come January 1st. There is a press release. I think I did my article where Father Lombardi says, yeah, and we're already working on a replacement. So they're already starting to work on, okay, how do we get around this? So they had some options, and then we find out that they ended up hiring a Swiss firm called, I think it was called a Nudo, or I think it's called a Nudo, and they were able to use them because being Switzerland, they were outside the authority of the EU. So that's how the Vatican kind of got around, at least for the short term. So the problem had been solved. So it wasn't like a massive, pontificate-ending crisis. Now, I think that even if you might say that, that could have frightened Benedict. Yeah, but Benedict obviously knew and was involved with the hiring of that company and contracting with it. So he knew this was all going on in the background, that we're going to get a replacement. He had a replacement. He knew that they're going to probably click it on again at February 12th. So he said, okay, problem solved. I'm not going to leave a problem to my successor. So now I can resign. And that's what I think happened, is that there was nothing, untoward about it, nothing conspiratorial. I don't think we have to put a conspiratorial edge on it. And I think if you had more balanced coverage of that, maybe that might come out. And that's why I was hoping LifeSite would publish this particular article. Again, they don't have to publish anything I write. Again, my appreciation that they did, but that might have given a different perspective to the reader. Like, okay, well, that explains why that happened, And I outlined in the article how we know Benedict did resign freely. One, he said so in his resignation. He said he was resigning because of his age and his incapacity, because of his age, his weakness. And he said, I resigned with full freedom. Are we going to call him a liar?
Yeah.
2 days later, after on the 13th of February, one day after the turn on of the ATMs and payment systems again, he again basically repeated the same spiel. I'm resigning with full freedom. And then with an interview with Seawald, I forget what year it was. It might have been 2000. I think I have the year in the article and the source. I think it's 2016. Seawald asked him, "Did you resign? Were you pressured because of the VataLeaks?" So that's another theory, that VataLeaks maybe pushed them out. And I looked closely at that because I thought there's some strange things with VataLeaks too. On the surface, it looks like that it was an employee, the butler, who's actually, was trying to help. He thought he was helping Benedict by kind of leaking all this information.
Was that? Oh, I was thinking of his secretary.
Gonswin. No, Gonswin's an honest guy.
Yeah. But I
And
thought,
the butler was too.
pardon me?
The butler was too. I think
Yeah.
no one has kind of impugned his integrity, but obviously his judgment. Yes, I mean he thought helping the boss by leaking stuff that's embarrassing him, but I think he really thought that. So the question I always had was, again, as a former intelligence officer, okay, well, was he a stooge? Did someone, maybe false flag him to think, kind of say, hey, you can help Benedict by doing this? So I did look into that. And I have some articles on that stuff too. But even if you think that,
let me interrupt you for 1 second. Everyone, I put the link of Steve's article in the show notes on the YouTube channel beneath the live stream. I really want you to go in and read that article. This isn't a fast read because Steve is very thorough, and he kind of takes you through the history. Which is, after I read it, I was just so grateful, Steve, you sent that to me. After I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, I got to have you on. But for the ones that have just now come on, I just want to encourage you to go to that article because it's very good. So go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not one to necessarily take the kind of published story as at face value. The face value story was that the butler did this and he thought he was helping Benedict, and oops, it didn't, but it embarrassed him. I thought, that's kind of odd. I did have a couple articles in my Conclave Chronicles series where I look specifically at the Vatican leaks and try to kind of steelman a possible plot, what it might have looked like. But even if you do that, even if you accept that, Benedict was already thinking about resigning in June of 2012. I mean, he communicated that to Gonswain and to Cardinal Bertone, who at the time was the Secretary of State. He's already thinking about it then. And that now brings us back to the Seewald interview where Seewald asked him, did Vatileaks pressure you to resign because of that? And Benedict said, no, you can't resign under pressure. I mean, I had the quote in the article, and you can't, because one of the conditions of resigning in canon law is that a resignation has to be made freely. That's one of the two conditions. So obviously Benedict was cognizant of that because he said so to Seewald. Said, no, I couldn't. So he said he waited till after the trials, after it was concluded, and the trial for the butler and any other, I forget if there might be one other accomplice, known accomplice, that was in October. I think it might have ended in November. So it was by December again, he was back to thinking, okay, I'm going to resign. And I don't think a date was set on that yet, but he said in his response to Seewald, everything was calm again, so I could. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't recall seeing anything in any of the Seewald interviews about this whole payment system, ATM stuff. But even if you want to say, well, that was a plot, even if you want to say that, okay, and that hit in December, you could say, well, maybe, all right, well, Benedict waited till he solved that before he officially resigned. He did solve it because they got a replacement company to come in. Obviously, they didn't get the company to come in on February 12th. Obviously, man, you're a businesswoman, right? It takes a while to find a vendor. You vet the vendor. You're having negotiations. You're back and forth with contracts. So it takes time. So this was in the works, and he would have known that the turn-on date was going to be February 12th. And then he would have been. That's assuming he even thought this was a big enough issue to think I can't resign because of this. But he certainly didn't want to leave a headache to a future pope. Like, yeah, you don't have any ATMs or payment systems. It's yours now. So, but he didn't want to do that. So he wanted to take care of it, and he did. They got the replacement company. They came in, turned it on the 12th. Problem solved. Not that all the money laundering issues. They still continued under Francis, but that's another story. So you have all that. So I think the examples they keep on using, I think the life cycle, I think John Henry had mentioned that one a time or two. And I think maybe Vigano had mentioned it. So that's why I thought it was important. Well, let's look at this one, because there's really only two, in my mind, two events or two theories that kind of look like plots that we know of, right? Unless you're going to say that they were feeding him pills or something. Well, unless that's just all speculation. But the Vatican Leaks thing is something that happened, and the cutoff of the ATMs, that's something that happened. So you do have to address those two, and I do in articles in my book and in my article, this specific article, and even if you look at them, give the other side the benefit of the doubt that there was some sort of plot, the problem was solved. He waited till the issue was over, like he told Seawald. You can't resign, while there's trouble. He solved the problem, and then he could resign. And then going back to my comment earlier about it, it looked like he wanted to resign almost from the beginning.
Well, he said that he did not. He wasn't looking to be Pope.
Well, yeah, but he accepted. So you think, hopefully, I don't think it's a good idea for popes to resign. I think this is a perfect example why, hopefully, popes stick it out to the end. But he was elected in 2005, I think it was. We do know, and he left in 2013. We know in 2009, and I linked to it. There's a video of him visiting the grave or the tomb of Pope Celestine V. And I think that was I think it was the Pope in the 1200s or 1300s. I forget the exact dates. But he was a Pope who was Pope for about 5 months, and he's like a monk or a hermit. He was Pope for about 5 months. He's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go back to being a hermit or a monk. This job is not for me. So he was the first Pope to have resigned under that kind of circumstance, where he didn't feel like he had the capacity. It's not. We've had other popes that resigned before and after because they're doing it for the good of the church, maybe just to solve the Great Schism, where we had 3 popes at one time, or they were kind of maybe even had some pressure to get them out. But this is like the first pope really just to kind of, other than Benedict, the only 2 popes to really kind of walk away from it without any other contingency facing them. So anyway, so Benedict visited his tomb in 2009, laid his pallium upon the tomb. So right there, and that's the symbol of papal authority. There's 2 things a pope gets, in certainly modern times, post Vatican II, when they are inaugurated as pope. They get the pallium and they get the fisherman's ring. And I think people at the time thought, is that symbolically, does that mean something? He's laying down his pallium. But not only that, we can go back even further. We can't get into here, but I've done other articles on Monsignor books, because some things he said over the last couple of years are very significant to the Bene Papist controversy. But one of the things he said in an interview, and I linked to it in my article, is that in 2006, as early as 2006, Benedict had sent a note to a bunch of theologians and maybe even to the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, of which I think Monsignor Books was privy or was on or was a consultor for them, asking about the possibility of papal resignation. So here you have Benedict at that time, Pope, maybe for less than maybe a year, was already putting out an inquiry to the CDF. Okay, what's the deal with papal resignations? So what I see from that, and I always kind of thought that, my theory has been that Benedict looked at having accompanied the pontificate of John Paul II, right, for whatever, how many years it was, 20, 25, 26 years, I forget how many years it was. And he saw how he kind of went downhill. You remember how bad the Pope was, John Paul was, in those last remaining years and months. And I think Benedict, for him, concluded that he wouldn't want to do that to the church. I'm not saying he was right in concluding that, but that comes out in the Seawald interviews too. He did say in the Seawald interviews that, if you can't do the job, for me at least, and he actually says it, for me at least, it's time to step down from the chair of Peter. That's almost a direct quote, or at least close enough quote. I quoted in some of my articles, but you can find that in Seawald. So my view is that from the very beginning, he thought he was not going to be a pope who was going to hang on to the bitter end, where he was laying in bed with tubes attached to him and that he was looking into what a papal resignation officially might look like. And so we know that he was looking at, so a couple things. One, we know he's looking at it early on, and then we know in his in the Declaratio, his instrument of resignation, various comments he made since then, and also in his Seawall interviews, that he was resigning freely. And that even if, that's the point, going back to what I said earlier, that even if there had been some plot, and like I said, I wouldn't put past Obama and those guys to say, gee, this Pope, and actually, to tell you, Francis has turned out to be kind of like a Pope of their dreams. I mean, some of his policies and things like that, some of the things that he's gone along with, the COVID shots and stuff like that. So he's been a dream come true, I think, for kind of the globalist vision of the world and of mankind, unfortunately. And but even with all that, you look at what Benedict said, his looking at a resignation almost right after his election. All the things he said, is clear he resigned because of his weakness and all that. And to say otherwise, and this is the kicker, to say that he was pressured is to call Benedict a liar and a coward.
Mhm. Yeah.
He lied for 12 years, and he was a coward for 12 years. They never communicated that to anyone. I mean, he had visitors. Gonswain's an honorable man. He didn't communicate anything to him. We haven't heard. We would have heard. There's no reason for Gonswain not to tell us now that, oh yeah, this is big conspiracy going on in the world. Here it is. Know this. Nothing from him. Nothing from all. He could have communicated something. If he was pressured out, he could have whispered something to a guest or something. He could have written a last testament.
Mhm.
Gave it to someone with a thumb drive. Hey, I'm dead. Plugging this into your computer and kind of outlining what all happened. This is what they tried to do to me. This is why I left. So this is, Francis is an anti-pope. He didn't do any of that. So not only would he be a liar and a coward, he's kind of a monster for letting the whole charade go on and not giving us any knowledge to help us understand that's what happened. So I think those are some big stumbling blocks to any theory that Benedict was pressured out, I think.
Yeah, I think he freely resigned too,
I see, yeah.
Steve. Yeah. Um, guest, viewers, if you have any questions for Steve, would you put them in the comments? We've got some comments, but we don't have any questions, and we've got about 10 minutes left. Steve, can you believe we're almost to an hour? And something you said earlier, I have no problem with people, Catholics, criticizing Pope Francis in a well, there's no let me just say this. Instead of criticizing Pope Francis, I have no problem with Catholics providing their feedback on their thoughts of disagreeing with Pope Francis. I've got no problem with that. What I have a problem with, though, is when they won't call him Pope Francis and they keep referring to him as Bergoglio and the anti-pope and all of that. That's disrespectful. And
well, I mean, I think because the Italians will call him Bergoglio. I mean, they'll call they called John Paul II Wojtyla, Pope Wojtyla.
I'm talking about
there is kind of a history of that, but I see your point.
Yeah, I'm talking about John Henry Weston, Vigano, Father Altman, and the rest of them that constantly, they don't provide feedback. They criticize the Pope. And some have gone so far as to say they don't recognize him as Pope. I mean, that doesn't help the Catholic Church, and it doesn't help Catholics.
No.
And when I saw the recent, I call it a conspiracy theory from Taylor Marshall that Benedict was forced to resign, I am like, can we just move on and not create more controversy to divide Catholics even further. So what's the solution, Steve?
Well, I can't speak to that. Taylor Marshall talking about being pressured out. I do recall like maybe a video long ago, he might have talked about the ATM thing. And I actually I think I forget what he actually said on that. So I can't speak to what he said on that. However, I think I think that sites and online kind of newspapers have responsibility just what they say. I mean, it's okay, I guess, to have opposite views. Like I said, I'm for sharing information and all that, but make sure you have both sides so people get the other side. But again, I'm not looking at that. Those sour grapes. I mean, I don't have to be published on Lifestyle News. Again, I appreciate that did. But if you're going to allege that there's some, my view, when I argue something on my blog, I'll give the other side. Even though I know, I mean, I'm me and I'm not. I don't allow other people opposite views on my site, so I can't attack someone for not letting me on their site. So that'd be hypocrisy. But in my articles, I try to give both sides, or at least what the other side is saying. And I think having at least doing that, I think is helpful. But I think obviously some of these bigger sites have a responsibility that they're just not always dwelling on the conspiratorial aspects. At least say what the other side, we say X, or folks over here that say this is conspiracy here. Yeah, but here's the opposite view, and with some detail. I think you have responsibility. I think at that side, if you're a large podcaster or online newspaper, to at least give both sides. You can have your own editorial position and say no, but we're over here with these guys that say no, he's not, or whatever. But I think you need to share that more, because I think in that sense, I think LifeSite News. I mean, I think I get the sense a lot of their readers, subscribership is kind of like over here with the conspiratorialists, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, journalism is supposed to be about presenting both sides. I mean, it's about facts. Journalism is about facts, presenting facts. And unfortunately, the secular media isn't any better. They're all positioning their narrative. And I think it's like I told my son one time, Steve, this was, I want to say last summer sometime. And I said to my son, he's very, very connected to politics like I am. And I said, how would you like to be 70 years old and realize that most of the things that you thought was true, you find out it wasn't?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-blowing. Just, when I go back through the decades and I think back about things and what I thought was true, no, it's not true at all.
That goes back to the importance of following the facts, and just like the history. Like
Uh-huh.
early on, if you follow my blog early on, I was big in. I got into. I thought about getting back into I had done some articles for the old Dis Rock magazine, which was Catholic Answers. Some of the articles might be available online. But I always had interest in that. But being a dad and being a coach and all that for years, kind of, I didn't have time to get into it. But as the kids got older, then I did have time, and I had thought about, I'll get back into it. But it was really Francis that got me back into it, is because I saw, like I said, the big problems there, and so I started looking at it and kind of trying to analyze that. And then I started thinking, gee, it is kind of odd for a pope to be like this. So I was open to, I'm open to all arguments, but I was open to see how can we, not how do we, or is there a way that maybe he's not pope? So I was certainly open to that. And I had various theories. I had some Jesuits came to me with the most interesting theory, I thought. Was actually my favorite theory. Not that I'm supporting it, but it was the most interesting theory. But then there was the Benny Papist thing. So I had seen Ann Barnhart's thing and Mark Doherty, who's a kind of associate of hers, some of their articles, and how they said, oh, and then that's, oh, that might be interesting. So I was open to it. But like you said, you can't let your heart lead you. You got to go with facts, and that's just common sense. So I'm not saying that's because I was former CIA that I kind of looked at just follow the facts, because it doesn't help you to think the Japanese are over there when they're really over here, because you want them to be over there because you don't have to worry about them. But it's the facts you want to follow. And then, so they said, oh, Benedict said this in his last audience, and I looked at the whole last audience. Well, that's not what he's saying, because up here he defined his terms, and it's not saying what you're saying it is. So from the beginning, I could see, even though I wanted it to be, but this, from the first of my analysis, you can see it go back to 2017, some of my earlier articles. I said, that's not what he's saying, what you guys are saying. And that kind of started me down this track. And being a small blog, right, you got to pick and choose what you cover, right? I mean, you can't be the daily news, because it's oh, I'll cover that, but I can't write an article on that for a week because the kids or something, and then someone else has done it. Oh, too bad. So I try to find things that I could take my time on and go into more detail. And then of course, I was interested in what's going on with the churches and papacy. So I was naturally interested in the conclave and this whole Benny Papist thing. And so a lot of my blogs kind of ended up devoted to those areas.
Well, here's an example I want to give you. Remember when Pope Francis said, all paths lead to God? Remember when he said that to a bunch of children at a school?
He said what?
He said, all paths lead to God. And John Henry Weston beat that drum over and over again for 2 solid weeks, 4 or 5 times a day, saying, that he was wrong. Bergoglio was wrong. But not one time did he mention that a week later, Pope Francis said, there's only one path, and that's through Jesus. Now, that was never reported by John Henry Weston and LifeSite News. They wouldn't report it. And I hounded him on social media about that. And all he kept doing is just repeating that same drum from Pope Francis's first statement, but would not give Pope Francis the benefit of the doubt and then report the other thing he said.
Right.
So that's where I've just stopped even reading LifeSite, having anything to do with them. I know that you can't stand that firm because they do print your articles. And I understand that fine. I understand that fine line, Steve. I do.
Well, I don't think. My guess is I will not be printed again. After this article, I have a sense that I will not be printed again. But I appreciate what they did before. I think that was honest of them to put it forward, and they have their editorial selections and reasons, and so I. But I thought it was important enough to put it out there, and that's why I obviously put it out on my blog.
Well, we have a question. Do you mind taking a question?
Absolutely.
Karen Stark is an avid viewer. Thank you, Karen, for being on. We've got a lot of comments. We just don't have any questions. Does the Catholic Church have any ability to address the influencers who spread rumors or lies about the church? And then part 2 is, does the church leadership have any responsibility to respond to the laity?
Well, no, I think there is no way, and I don't know if there should be a way. I mean, Canon 212 talks about the laity have the right. I mean, I have to be respectful. I don't know if I always. If you go through my articles, I'm sure the ones I probably cringe at today, but I don't think there is something, and I don't think, and certainly in the predominant Western world where people have this attachment to free speech and all that, but to kind of have the church come in and say you have like a forbidden index of podcasters or something, I don't think that'd be a wise move to do. But does the church have a responsibility to respond to the laity? Yeah, I think they do. I mean, but again, not in a democratic sense where there are representatives. I mean, the church is hierarchical. I mean, it's just common sense pastoral is to kind of let the sheep know what's going on here and why. And that's part of the problem, I think, just overall with say like Francis's approach. I mean, one, I think he's been trying to put some of the things like Amoris Laetitia. I mean, I think there's no way to square that with what went before. But one problem I have with him is he made no attempt to, because it's so obvious to Joe Sixpack, no communion for adulterers, and under certain circumstances you can. Though that does not compute, and there's no, he makes no real connection as to how you get from John Paul II to Amoris Laetitia, and that's and he made no attempt to do that. And that's the problem, is that I think he has a moral. I think he had a moral responsibility. Did he have like a ecclesiastical responsibility on paper to tell us how he got there? But no, it's sort of pastorally. If there is a reason, I personally can't see how you can get to it. But if there was, or at least he didn't make an effort to do that, and that's part of the problem with a lot of the things that he does. With his airplane thing, he's always. And that's how we got here. Where we have people believing that Benedict didn't resign because they don't want Francis, is because he doesn't watch what he says, and that to me is his biggest fault. I'm not going to be his divine judge, but if there's like a human jury for criminal negligence and all that, I really feel sorry that there's a lot of folks out there who see. Who can't, well, we can't swear it, but their faith is being blown up by this. That he just throws things out there, and he doesn't care. It's like an abusive father. He doesn't seem to care that his words have a serious impact on how people feel. Like, gee, people who might not be as educated in the faith, they might have very low education in the faith, but they understand the core principles of the principle of non-contradictions. Like, that doesn't make sense. So unfortunately, we have people like I've seen people on Twitter go from being Catholics to being, well, not the Benny Papists aren't Catholic, but they've gone towards like the Benny Papist view, and then they've gone to Sadomasochism, and then we've seen people take Steve Skocek. I don't know where he is spiritually and all that, but right, even he had I don't know what his numbers have been, but I would think it was one of the premier go-to places I went to, just to kind of get what's current on Catholic thought and all that. And where is he now?
Did
And
he leave the church? Because that was my understanding. He left the
church. I have no personal knowledge other than what we see. My understanding just from reading, and I could be wrong. I think he's kind of evolved more towards the agnostic side of things, and he certainly sold and unloaded 1 Peter 5, I think, the Crisis magazine, I think, and so that's unfortunate. And I mean, we're all responsible for the choices we make, but you might have friends who've kind of gone all these different ways, and a lot of that is, I think, Francis not even attempting to square the circle. Tell us how you get a square. How do you create a square circle? I mean, you can't, but at least try to show us that you're thinking, and you don't see that. You just get these things he just says, like all paths lead to God. There's so many things. You kind of forget everyone he says. There's like a little cloud of Francis sayings out there, and I don't recall. I guess I probably do recall that generally. So I don't want to beat up on life's side on that, but I don't know what was said. But he's throwing those things all the time, and you just get peppered with all this junk, and it just erodes people's faith in God, in the church.
Well, here's my opinion. I think Pope Francis has been unfairly compared to Pope Benedict, and Pope John Paul. Those two men were intellectuals. Pope Francis is not an intellectual at all. And that's not a disparaging comment towards him. He's just not an intellectual.
Yeah, well, he's the Jesuits took him. I mean, maybe.
Well, that doesn't mean he's an intellectual, though.
Well, no, but they have some brain power. So I like I said, if I'm on that human jury of criminal negligence, I'm not on the divine jury of what happens to him, but human jury, I say, no, this guy ought to know better. He became a cardinal of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. He Jesuit, went to college, and he was a pope. He should have you get that high, you should have the common sense to know that you just can't say anything, or you'd be more guarded in what you say. But we all know you have a son. I have 4 boys. They're all grown now. You have to kind of watch what you say, what topics you say, and how fast you bring someone along on certain types of topics about life lessons. And he showed no caution. And aside from just, I think, theological errors he made, this is, to me, is even bigger, because this is the one that really, I think, is just blowing up people, is that there's no attempt to explain. He's happy just throwing stuff out there, and he thinks he's pleased his punch. He's just like, he's trolling us. That's what it kind of comes across
Well, I
as.
don't think that, but I do say this. I have said this on my podcast many times, that since I've committed not to bash Pope Francis, I don't pay attention to what he says anymore. I don't pay attention to LifeSite News either, or Taylor Marshall, or that whole side, or Vigano, because what happened to me, Steve, was it put me in a very negative mindset. God is not negative. God is love. So if you're constantly going down this negative path, this is not good for your soul, and it is not good to constantly feed yourself. And I couldn't figure out why I was so depressed all the time. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to go to confession because I was so wrapped into all of these people. And pardon me?
No, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so when, like I told you, when God kind of had that come to Jesus moment with me, I stopped it all. And then all of a sudden, my peace was restored. I wanted to go to mass. I wanted to go to confession. I wanted to pray again, because I stopped listening to all of this negativity about Pope Francis. And I clearly saw the church splitting in two because of Vigano. And I just, I know you respect former Archbishop Vigano. I do not, Steve. I don't. He has caused this division in the church. Now, I know people are going to point back to Francis. It's Francis's fault. But he has led people away from Rome. And he was invited by LifeSite News and Vicky Yamasaki at the National Eucharistic Conference in Indianapolis, the final one. They had their very own conference at the same time as the Eucharistic National Conference. And they had a booth set up at the national conference, signing people up to go to their event because they were having the Latin Mass said. So they were inviting people to come to the Latin Mass. The national conference had a Latin Mass, and unknowing Catholics didn't know. So they went to this conference that John Henry, Vicky Yamasaki put on with Father Altman. And lo and behold, they did not tell him Vigano was going to speak. They said they had a special speaker. And so they went online, or they went to this event, and then Vigano came on. And, apparently the video that Michael Matt wouldn't show, they showed at the conference. And I had Catholics reaching out to me, asking me about all of this, and saying they could not believe how they were all criticizing and bashing Pope Francis, and wouldn't call him Pope Francis, was calling him Bergoglio. So that's why I'm so adamant about moving away from all of that.
No, I agree. I think with the wider point, I think getting away from is in the backstage of the software here, I said too that I've gotten away from watching the stuff less, and I think that's part of the answer, right? Because it's a what do you, it's like it's like a death loop where you just
Yeah.
kind of it all feeds. It's like you're in an information bubble. You're just hearing the same thing. You're just an echo, I guess, an echo chamber, I would say.
Yeah.
So I don't watch as much, or if I would found other ones are interesting. I mean, I still will watch or read more deep thought think pieces on Francis and stuff. So I mean, I still keep in touch with that, but I think just the ongoing kind of conspiratorial stuff, other than just to do research for any articles I write, just to go back on Vigo. Yeah, Vigo. I'm not saying I disrespect him, but or make a blanket respect him. I said I respect what he's done with his life, and he was a good man. I don't want to cast somebody off and all that, but clearly after the testimony he came out, which was actually which I thought was a good deed for the church to kind of come out with all that for us to find out about that stuff, and hopefully the church to take actions against that type of stuff going in the future and disciplining those that maybe he's pointed out in that as well. However, all that said, people can go too far, in their efforts to right the ship. You can actually capsize a ship. And I think that as of right now, and following his trail of his thinking on Francis, I mean, he's no more an expert on Francis than a Cardinal Burke or an Athanasius Snyder. And I think it's telling that, you don't find him being at least a public collaborator with them. I mean, you'll see Burke with Cardinal Mueller and all that. I think those are the folks we should look at for examples of how you react to Francis, and they're respectful to Francis, but they will call out issues, gently, sometimes more gently than I wish they would. Things, but again, they're pastors of souls. They actually have to account for how they pastor souls and things like that. And so you have to kind of respect their prudence and how far they think they can go. And I think it should be a cautionary tale not to follow a lone wolf. And Vigano now is operating as basically a lone wolf out there, I think, and that should be should send off alarm bells for Catholics out there that how he's jumped around with his different theories. That he's just trying to. And then not only that, what we didn't even talk about, and is I forget what it was, that he came out, one of his articles or letters came out, and he kind of insinuated, directly, I think, that Francis had molested a seminarian back in Argentina a long time ago, but he had this information from a seminarian who wouldn't come forward, from a former seminarian who wouldn't come forward and say, or would not come forward. Well, that's an anonymous, unnamed tip. You can't do that. You can't. I mean, there's a lot of things to go after Francis on for, like possibly bad theology and maybe some errors or at least questionable things he said. But I mean, unless you got solid proof, he can't be saying stuff. And in fact, his most current one, didn't he say something about a body buried on Vatican grounds? Is his
I don't know. I won't read his nonsense.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I always put that in the art. I always put that in my article, but I just wanted to keep it focused on just jumping around on that. But that even that kind of stuff affects his credibility because.
Yeah.
And I mean, did Francis do stuff? I'm not going to say he didn't do that stuff. I mean, I don't know, but you can't just throw it out there. Christine's a bank robber. I don't know that. Someone down at the racetrack told me that. You just can't ruin someone's reputation like that. And so that's not helpful when you just kind of do that. So right now it seems like just throwing anything you can at the wall to make it stick. Oh, substantial error, boom, that doesn't work. How about Ratzinger code? How about he resigned under pressure? Boom, or Francis, was never elected because he's a heretic, or there's something wrong with so it just seems now just trying to make anything stick, and that's the danger. Is I think folks need to kind of back off from that and kind of look at other stuff. You could get my book and read why they're wrong. This is valid. And I'm open to questions too. I mean, I know we were running out of time here when you get many.
We've got another question.
Oh, good. Right.
Yep. How do we strike a balance between respecting the Pope and yet not checking our brain at the door when something is obviously off? This is by Donna G, aka Ms. Book Lover. So she'll like your books.
Yeah, how do you, I think it's a great question. Yeah, you have to respect reality, right? I mean, reality will knock you on the side of the head. You can't ignore it, So there's understanding the kind of things you're seeing going on in the church, but also I think stepping back and understanding the church in the wide scope of its 2,000 years history. Man, we've had some pretty wild popes, and some corruption in Rome and all that. Now maybe Francis, and I think maybe he might be the worst of all the popes on various aspects. But overall, we've had some very bad popes. Pope Honorius, in terms of favoring heresy during the Monothelite heresy, being condemned by Pope St. Leo II. You've had other popes, John the 22nd, I think it was, who in public homilies questioned certain aspects of the church's teaching on the beatific vision. He had to be corrected. I mean, I think on his deathbed he came forward and took everything back. And I think the Pope following him actually issued a papal bull where he declared infallibly what the church's teaching is. So that's something that might happen, I think, with Francis, I hope. But yeah, so yeah, you got how do you check the balance? You got to know your faith, have a little more perspective on what's going on, and just have patience and realize God works in his time, not our own time.
Well, Donna, this is what I do. I put my blinders on. See Jesus in the background there? I keep my eyes on Jesus, and I try not to let all the noise influence me, because I don't want to get pulled back down into that negativity and into that depression again and wanting to leave the church. So that's how I cope with it. And I wanted Steve to come on because of his excellent article. And I want to point you all back to his article. I'm going to show you one more time, because I agree. I believe Pope Benedict resigned freely too. It's on his blog. You're going to have to say that for me, Steve. People that watch me know me. I don't do well with Latin.
Nor do I. Roma locuta est.
Roma locuta est. Okay. And the link is in the description area below this live stream on YouTube. So you all can go and read that article. And I want to encourage you to read that article. So,
well, just to note too is that on video, I don't have many followers. I don't do regular shows, but I've done subject videos on different aspects of Benny Papism, so on different questions. So if you're looking just to watch something at your own speed on video, you can just do a search on the word Benny Papism or Steve O'Reilly Benny Papism. You'll find I think I have like 15 videos now that are out there.
There you go. There you go. Well, Steve, we're at an hour and almost 25 minutes.
Whoa, wow.
So we'll go ahead and sign off. And everyone, I really thank you for being on. If you need to contact me, there's my email address, and most of you all have that. But we have to remember this: 1 John chapter 2, verse 22. And this is the promise which he made to us, life everlasting. Eternal life is forever. And you all know my near-death experience story. If you don't, it's on my YouTube channel. And I can tell you, heaven is real. When you pass over, you are the same person you are on this side. And you get to experience the just unbelievable, unconditional, living love of God. And it's like something you will never experience. So you want to make sure that if you've got a plan to get to heaven, at the very least, purgatory, right? That's what I'm hoping for.
Get your foot in the door, right?
Yeah. Just get your foot in the door. And of course, we know We know our path is only through Jesus. So that's your plan, everyone. Steve, thank you so much for being on. I really, really appreciate the time that you gave us all today.
Well, thank you, Christine, for having me on. Really appreciate it.
All righty. Everybody, I'll see you soon. And what I had promised you that I was going to do Wednesday or Thursday, I will get to it. And I'm thinking maybe tomorrow or Monday. So don't hold me to it. But when Steve reached out to me, he took priority over what I was going to do. So you're special, Steve.
Well, thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.